Hi, so I wanted to do my teaching topic on fetal circulation. Hopefully this works. I wanted to discuss fetal circulation and how that works in terms of a system in anatomy. Some important notes. So fetal circulation is referenced a little differently from adult circulation, or not even adult, but post-birth circulation. The point of reference for a fetus is actually the fetal heart, especially when we're talking about the veins and the arteries that go to the fetus that provide the fetus with the nutrients and the oxygen that it gets from the mother. And so this happens because there's actually two umbilical arteries which take blood from the fetus, from the fetal heart to the placenta. And then there's one umbilical vein. So it carries blood from the placenta to the fetal body, which this is a little differently. So the umbilical vein is being fed by arteries from the mother, and the umbilical arteries are coming from the heart when blood is deoxygenated. So it's actually going into the placenta and will eventually get its oxygen from the mother. So this is a little it's the same concept as when you're talking about receiving blood and blood vessels in an adult. So blood going away from the fetal heart is still an artery, but blood going to the fetal heart is still a vein. So another important note is the placenta, which is a temporary organ connected to the uterus and facilitates the blood circulation going to the developing fetus. And it is expelled after the child is born. And the placenta is also fully formed by the end of month 3 or the first trimester. So it takes a while to get going, and that's actually why the rates of miscarriages and issues in utero drop so drastically after the first trimester, because this organ is providing this necessary nutrients and facilitating the diffusion of oxygen to the fetal body. So some important structures when it comes to fetal circulation, the foramen ovale is what diverts blood from the right atrium to the left atrium. So it's a hole which will eventually close up after the child is born. The ductus arteriosus diverts blood from the pulmonary trunk to the aorta, and the ductus venosus carries blood from the umbilical vein through the liver and into the inferior vena cava. So this is a diagram of how the fetal circulation works. So when there's a fetus inside of another living being, inside of the mother, these three structures that I just talked about are actually what facilitate the bypass of blood through the liver, which like the fetal liver is not filtering the blood. It's still receiving blood through the umbilical vein, but it's not filtering the blood. It's not cleaning it in any way because there's no need, because the blood is being filtered by the mother's liver. Additionally, it bypasses the lungs, which means that the oxygen does not need to be diffused. So in adult circulation, obviously oxygen comes into the lungs and then gets transferred for carbon dioxide and in the process of respiration. And that allows oxygen then to be taken from the lungs, diffused through the capillaries back into the pulmonary circuit, and then eventually expelled through the left ventricle to the rest of the body, and will thus facilitate in diffusion other places in the body, allowing the rest of the adult body to get the unnecessary oxygen it needs to run. However, in obviously fetuses are not actually breathing, and so there still needs to be oxygen diffusion there, but it's not taking in oxygen through the lungs. So inside the lungs there is blood flowing when in a way that is very different than what it is when you are fully developed. So blood is flowing through the fetal lungs as a way to get carbon dioxide to all of those capillaries, to all of the tissue that is there, so it does not die. However, it kind of creates an opposite pressure system from an adult. And I'm talking about adult in this video as somebody who is grown and birthed, just for reference. So blood flows from the right to the left in the fetal heart because the resistance to the blood flow through the lungs, so like the lungs are not wanting to accept the blood flow because they're designed for air. It creates a higher pressure system on the right side of the body, which then makes the blood flow from the right to the left through these shunts that are created by the foramen ovale and the ductus arteriosus. So both of those structures are shunts that deliver blood from the left to the right. So going through this nice diagram that I've drawn, I've highlighted with a fancy color the different structures which are different in a fetus than they are in an adult. So the placenta is obviously the temporary organ. The umbilical vein is what is taking blood to the heart. So it's taking oxygenated blood from the mother, ultimately from the placenta into the fetus. And then the umbilical vein then carries blood through the ductus venosus, which is the structure that transports blood through the liver, bypassing the hepatic portal system. And it gets diffused through the liver capillaries and ends up, all of that is dumped into the inferior vena cava, which then takes oxygenated blood to the right atrium of the heart. And then from there it splits. Some goes through the right atrium, through the foramen ovale, the foramen ovale into the left atrium, and then that works as somewhat of a pump to the left ventricle and then eventually out to the aorta through that system. However, other blood goes into the right ventricle and up through the pulmonary trunk. It goes through the lungs, not to exchange oxygen, but to oxygenate the tissues that are there. And then from the lungs, some of it gets dumped back into the left atrium and follows the same path that I originally talked about. But the other part of the blood flows through the pulmonary trunk, through the ductus arteriosus, which connects in fetus to the aorta. So both of those structures are connected, which allows the blood to reach the aorta as well. And so from the aorta, the blood is then expelled into umbilical arteries, which is connected back to the placenta. So by the time it gets into the umbilical arteries, it's becoming more and more deoxygenated as it flows through the fetus and then returns to the placenta, ultimately through to the mother in order to be reoxygenated. And the process starts all over again. So what happens to the fetal structures after birth? I've mentioned some structures which are different. They were highlighted in the last slide. I already discussed, but the placenta is a temporary organ which gets expelled after birth. It's actually delivered. And then the foramen ovale becomes the fossa ovalis and closes off in the interatrial septum. So there's a small divot there in an adult heart. However, that's supposed to close, and that shunt should not be opened. If it is, that's a problem because deoxygenated blood is then getting recycled back through without being oxygenated through the pulmonary circuit again. The next one is the ductus arteriosus, which becomes a ligamentum anteriosum. It's a ligament that links the pulmonary trunk to the aortic arch. So that shunt just automatically closes and becomes a ligament, which just kind of provides structure for those massive vessels which are coming off of the heart and provides support for them. It just automatically closes off. The ductus venosus becomes a ligamentum venosum, which is just a ligament in the liver holding things together. The umbilical arteries become medium umbilical ligaments that hold the arteries in the body. They just attach to the arteries where they originally would empty into or take blood from the arteries to the placenta. They hold that to the umbilicus. So the entrance point in a fetus for the umbilical arteries and then the veins is all wrapped around the umbilicus, which is where the fetus is then attached to the placenta. The umbilical veins become the ligamentum teres, or the round ligament in the liver. So it's what just divides the lobes in an adult liver, and provides structure. So all of these structural components in utero then become supportive ligaments and hopefully close off once the child is born. So that is my presentation on fetal circulation. Thank you.